Hi, my name is Elaine Park, and this is the story of how I learned that being overlooked can sometimes be the sharpest weapon you carry. For nearly 15 years, I worked quietly in the background of Park Tech Solutions, the company my brother David and I inherited after our father passed away. To the world, David was the star. He gave the speeches, smiled for the cameras, shook hands with investors, and appeared in glossy magazine articles. I was the quiet sister, the one who stayed late at the office, perfecting code, drafting contracts, building systems no one cared to understand until they worked flawlessly. Most people didn't even realize how much of our success came from what I created. And honestly, I didn't mind. I never needed the spotlight. I believed, perhaps naively, that the work would speak for itself. Our story started decades earlier. My father arrived in California from Busan with little more than a suitcase and an old calculator. By day, he worked at a repair shop fixing televisions and radios. At night, he read borrowed manuals about computers and programming. Slowly, he pieced together a dream and, eventually, a small IT consulting business. That humble office in Sacramento, just 3 desks and a secondhand server, was where David and I grew up. When Dad died 5 years ago, he left us equal shares of the company. His final words were simple but heavy. Stay together, protect each other, build something that lasts. I took those words to heart. By then, I had already been working on a new kind of data security program, one that used adaptive algorithms to protect businesses from online threats before they even occurred. It was my pride, my secret project, and ultimately the innovation that would transform our modest family business into a thriving company. The trouble began 3 years ago, when David met Marissa at a tech networking event. She was everything I wasn't: tall, magnetic, educated at Ivy League schools with a polished way of speaking that made investors lean in to listen. Within 6 months, she and David were married. Within a year, she was campaigning to join the company. Elaine, Marissa has the kind of financial expertise we desperately need, David insisted one evening, his eyes glowing with hope. She could help us scale to the next level. I stayed quiet. What he didn't know was that I had already secured venture funding through relationships I had carefully built over years. Our expansion strategy was already in place, but I swallowed my objections because I didn't want to cause a rift. Marissa started as a financial consultant, but her ambition was obvious. She didn't just advise, she pushed, demanded, and inserted herself into every major decision. Soon, she was filling leadership roles with her Ivy League contacts, people who looked impressive on paper, but often lacked the grit or vision our company had been built on. To her, I was invisible, not a founder, not an innovator, just David's sister who handled the tech stuff. The tension simmered for years, until last week, at a party that would change everything. Marissa had just been named Chief Financial Officer, a title she lobbied for endlessly. To celebrate, she hosted a glamorous reception at the Grand Hyatt in San Francisco, inviting venture capitalists, reporters, and influencers. It wasn't just a party. It was her stage. I arrived early in a simple gray dress, professional, understated, the kind of thing Dad would have respected. Marissa, by contrast, shined in a glittering gown that turned heads the moment she entered. She thrived on attention, and she knew she had it. I walked over to congratulate her, but before I could speak, she turned to a cluster of her friends and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "Why is the office assistant here? This is supposed to be an executive celebration." The group chuckled uneasily. David stood nearby, frozen, not daring to correct her. His silence cut deeper than her words. Marissa smirked, then added with a sugary laugh, "Oh, I forgot. You're technically part of the company. I just hardly ever see you at any of the important functions." I felt years of being overlooked condense into that single, searing moment. But I didn't break. I didn't argue. I simply lifted my glass and replied, calmly but firmly, "Congratulations, Marissa. Tomorrow is going to be very revealing." She barely glanced at me before turning back to her admirers, but I left the party early, slipping away with a quiet smile no one understood. Because what Marissa never bothered to check, what David himself had long forgotten, was that the real power inside Park Tech wasn't in titles or gowns or magazine covers. It was in the shares. And that night, when I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the documents I had kept hidden for years, I knew that the balance of power was about to shift forever.
I wasn't expecting an invitation. Certainly not from her. A week after that gala, an embossed envelope arrived at my townhouse. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind that suggested control. "You are cordially invited to a private dinner at our residence. Formal attire." It was signed simply, Victoria. For a moment, I considered tossing it into the recycling bin. After all, why subject myself to another evening of thinly veiled insults? But curiosity tugged at me. Why invite me now? She had spent years pretending I didn't exist, dismissing my contributions as clerical work. And now, suddenly, a dinner invitation? I called my brother. "Did you know about this?" I asked. Michael hesitated. "She wanted to extend an olive branch. Maybe give her a chance, Emily. She's adjusting." Adjusting. That was his favorite word when it came to Victoria. She wasn't difficult. She was adjusting. She wasn't controlling. She was adjusting. Always adjusting, yet somehow everyone else bent around her. Still, I accepted. Not because I craved her approval, but because sometimes silence only feeds the arrogance of people like her. If she wanted me there, she would see me there, fully present, not invisible. The night of the dinner, I wore a navy blue dress, simple yet strong. My mother's pearl earrings, a gift on my graduation day, felt like armor. When I arrived, their mansion was lit like a beacon, glass walls reflecting golden light, the kind of wealth that screams louder than words. Inside, the dining table stretched longer than necessary, set with crystal glasses and heavy silverware. Victoria sat at the head, smiling with that perfect, polished grin. Guests, investors, socialites, old family friends filled the seats. But the chair to her right was reserved for me. "Emily," she said sweetly as I approached, "so glad you could make it. We've all been dying to meet the woman who keeps my husband's schedule running smoothly." My stomach tightened. There it was, the subtle jab wrapped in velvet. To them, I was still the secretary, the girl with calendars and coffee runs, not the one who had spent years keeping the company alive while Michael chased investors. And now, suddenly, a dinner invitation? I smiled politely, sitting down. "I'm happy to be here," I replied evenly. The evening unfolded like theater. Victoria steered every conversation, dropping hints about new projects, expansion plans, and her influence over Michael's decisions. The guests nodded, impressed, feeding her performance. And then, mid-toast, she raised her glass towards me. "To Emily, the invisible hand behind our success, quiet, reliable, always in the background." The table laughed politely. Invisible. She had said it with charm, but it stung sharper than Maid ever could. Because invisibility wasn't an accident, it was a dismissal, a deliberate erasure. I lifted my glass too. To invisibility, the kind that lets others underestimate you until it's too late. A few guests chuckled, thinking it was a joke, but Victoria's smile faltered just a second, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. That single crack in her facade told me everything. She thought she had me cornered, but what she didn't realize was this. Invisibility, when chosen, is not weakness, it's strategy.
The dinner lingered in my mind long after the guests had gone home and the crystal glasses had been cleared away. Invisible. That word repeated itself like an echo every time I tried to sleep. She thought it was clever, even endearing, but it was the kind of word that reduced a person to nothing more than background noise. I'd been called worse in my life. Immigrant, nerd, workaholic. But invisible struck differently. It wasn't about who I was. It was about erasing me completely. And that I couldn't forgive. The very next morning, I had an early board meeting downtown. Unlike the grand theatrics of Victoria's dinner, the boardroom was sterile. White walls, glass doors, and the faint hum of a projector. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I always did, laptop in hand, notes ready. When Michael entered, Victoria trailed beside him like a shadow. She wasn't a board member, not officially, but she acted as though she belonged there. She adjusted his tie, whispered in his ear, and even sat down at the table, claiming a chair without hesitation. "Good morning, everyone," Michael began. His voice carried authority, but I could see the fatigue behind his eyes. He thrived on charm, but charm doesn't balance books or finalize contracts. That was my department. As the meeting unfolded, Victoria spoke more than Michael. She pitched new partnerships, criticized existing strategies, and casually dismissed several of my proposals. At one point, when I presented a carefully researched expansion plan into renewable tech, she leaned back and smirked. "Emily, that's cute," she said, as if I were a child showing off a science fair project. "But I think we should focus on real opportunities, not side hobbies." The word cute landed like a slap. Around the table, some board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one challenged her, not even Michael. I nodded calmly, clicking to the next slide. "Noted, but just for context, this cute project already has 3 venture capital firms interested. I've scheduled due diligence calls for next week." A murmur rippled through the room. Victoria blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected me to come armed with facts, with commitments already in place. The meeting ended, but the tension lingered. As the others filed out, Michael placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't take it personally," he whispered. "Don't I?" I asked, looking him in the eye. He didn't answer. Victoria stayed behind, pretending to scroll on her phone. I could feel her gaze flicking up at me, sharp and assessing. For the first time, I sensed she knew I wasn't going to stay invisible forever. But she didn't know the half of it. Because while she was busy parading through dinners and boardrooms, I had been building something else. Quietly, strategically, in the shadows. And soon, the shadows would no longer hide me. They would protect me as I stepped into the light. After that board meeting, something inside me shifted. For years, I'd convinced myself that silence was a strength, that staying in the background allowed me to build without distraction. But Victoria's smirk, her casual dismissal of years of work, showed me that silence could also be mistaken for weakness. And weakness, that was something I couldn't afford. The first step was simple. Gather proof. Proof of her mismanagement, her manipulation,
her quiet attempts to rewrite the company's future in her own image. I started with financial reports. Late at night, when the office was empty and the cleaning crew shuffled through with their carts, I'd sit alone in the glow of my laptop, combing through spreadsheets. At first, everything looked normal. Salary adjustments, departmental expenses, R&D allocations. But then, tiny inconsistencies appeared. A project listed as Marketing Expansion Initiative had no invoices attached. Payments made to consultants who had no digital footprint. And then, the biggest red flag. A line item buried under strategic partnerships. It wasn't a partnership at all. It was a disguised transfer of funds to an offshore account. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Victoria wasn't just careless, she was calculated. She had been quietly diverting money, reshuffling budgets, and most dangerously, approaching competitors with the kind of information that could dismantle us overnight. One evening, I printed everything. Hundreds of pages of documentation. I spread them out across the long oak table in my office, the way Dad used to do when he was solving a problem. Each page was another piece of the puzzle, another glimpse into the empire Victoria was trying to build for herself. As I worked, memories flooded back. Dad sitting with me as a teenager, teaching me how to code firewalls. He'd say, "People will always try to take what isn't theirs, Emily. Your job isn't just to build, it's to protect." I realized then that he hadn't just been talking about computer systems. He'd been talking about everything, our family, our company, our future. But I couldn't go straight to the board with accusations. Not yet. Timing was everything. If I moved too soon, Victoria would twist the narrative, paint me as paranoid or vindictive. I needed leverage strong enough to silence her before she could even open her mouth. So I did something I'd never done before. I met quietly with Michael's assistant. She was young, sharp, and most importantly, loyal to me, not to Victoria. Over coffee in a quiet cafe, I slid the first set of documents across the table. "Keep this between us," I told her. "If anyone asks, you've never seen it." Her eyes widened as she skimmed the papers. "Emily, this is fraud." "Not yet," I said evenly, "but it's close. And if she keeps going, it will be catastrophic." The assistant nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she tucked the pages into her bag. I trusted her. She'd seen enough of Victoria's temper to know what was at stake. That night, as I drove home through the quiet streets, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. But what I didn't know then was that Victoria already sensed the shift, and she wasn't the type to sit quietly while someone threatened her position. She was preparing her own countermove, and soon, both of our games would collide. The first sign came in whispers. An overheard conversation in the hallway, a nervous glance from one of the department heads. Then an email, seemingly harmless, asking me to clarify my role in product development. At first, I brushed it off. But by the third email and the second accidental exclusion from executive calls, I knew what was happening. Victoria was moving faster than I expected. She was building a narrative, one where I was no longer essential, just a relic of the company's past. The confirmation came 3 nights later. Michael called me to his office. His tie was loose, his face pale, like he'd been wrestling with himself for hours. "Jen," he began carefully, "Victoria thinks we need to redefine your position." I said nothing, just stared at him until he squirmed in his chair. "She believes," he continued, "that your role has become too narrow, that the company needs a CTO with a stronger business background, someone who can connect with investors, not just engineers." I let the words sink in. This wasn't just an idea. This was a plan, a coup. She was trying to edge me out of my own company. And you, I asked finally, do you believe that too? Michael hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. She's persuasive, he admitted, avoiding my eyes. And some board members agree. They think you should focus on innovation and step back from leadership. I leaned back in my chair, my expression unreadable. Inside, however, I felt the heat rising. After everything I had built, after all the sacrifices, they wanted me to step aside for someone whose only real talent was manipulation? But I didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, I smiled faintly. If that's what the board thinks, then we'll see. Michael looked relieved, mistaking my calm for surrender. But what he didn't know was that while Victoria was gathering whispers, I was gathering proof. That night, I called my lawyer. Together, we reviewed every clause, every share transfer, every buried line in the company's charter. My 67% ownership wasn't just leverage, it was absolute control. If Victoria wanted a war, she had just declared it against the majority shareholder. Still, I wasn't reckless. I couldn't just drop the hammer now. The timing had to be perfect. One misstep, and she'd spin it as sibling rivalry, a petty power grab. So I waited. I let her weave her web, appointing her friends, stacking meetings with her allies, slowly isolating me from the decision-making circle. All the while, I was documenting everything. Every transfer, every unauthorized hire, every whisper of misconduct. And then she overplayed her hand. Late one evening, as I was reviewing server logs, I noticed a spike in activity from an unusual account, Victoria's private login. She wasn't supposed to have clearance to access our patent files. And yet, there it was. Attempts to download encrypted documents. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. She wasn't just trying to push me out anymore. She was trying to steal the very heart of our company. And that was the moment I knew. The war was no longer about influence. It was about survival. I didn't confront her that night. That's what she expected, that I'd storm into Michael's office, furious, demanding explanations. But I wasn't going to play her game. Not this time. Instead, I called an old friend, our head of cybersecurity, one of the few people Victoria hadn't managed to push out. Together, we created a silent watch list. Every keystroke from her login was mirrored to a secure server only I could access. Every document she touched, every folder she tried to open was recorded. For weeks, I said nothing. I attended meetings, smiled politely, let her accidentally leave me off email chains, even listened as she gave investors presentations that leaned heavily on work I had done. If she noticed my silence, she mistook it for defeat. But at night, I watched her. Every login attempt, every failed password guess, every copied file. Slowly, a pattern emerged. She wasn't working alone. Several of her so-called business school friends, the ones she had appointed into key roles, were also accessing restricted material. The picture was becoming clear. Victoria wasn't just climbing the ladder inside Chin Global, she was building her own empire on the side. The final piece dropped into place on a Thursday night. At 2:14 a.m., her account made another attempt, this time on the folder containing the crown jewel of our company, the prototype for our next-gen security system. She tried 3 times, failed, and then used Michael's override credentials. My heart sank. She had access to his passwords. Whether he gave them willingly or she manipulated him into handing them over, I didn't know. But that was the moment I realized Michael was no longer just blind. He was compromised. The next morning, I sat in my office, staring at my father's picture on the wall. His voice echoed in my mind. Take care of each other. How do you take care of someone who's destroying everything you built together? How do you protect your brother from the person he loves most? I made my decision. If Victoria wanted to play with fire, I was going to let her burn herself. I instructed my team to set up a decoy server. The next time she tried to access our patent, she wouldn't be downloading real files. She'd be downloading carefully crafted fakes, each stamped with invisible trackers that led straight back to her device. It was a dangerous game. If she realized too soon, she'd cover her tracks. But if it worked, I'd have undeniable proof. And 2 nights later, it happened. Her account logged in again, this time at 3:07 a.m. The files transferred cleanly. On my screen, a red marker blinked, showing the exact path the stolen data took, from our servers to her laptop to an external cloud account tied to a company I didn't recognize. I smiled for the first time in months. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I was weak, silent, finished. But now, I had everything I needed. The trap had been set. The proof was mine. And Victoria had no idea the ground beneath her feet was already crumbling. The next morning, I called an urgent meeting of the board. The message was simple. All board members must attend. Confidential company matters will be discussed. Victoria was there, of course, radiant and self-assured, as if she owned the room. Michael trailed behind, tense, avoiding my gaze. The rest of the executives filtered in, curious but unaware of the storm about to unfold. I started calmly, projecting a series of charts, logs, and timelines onto the screen. Thank you all for coming on short notice, I began. I've uncovered several concerning actions that threaten the stability and security of our company. Victoria's smile faltered slightly, but she covered it quickly. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting everyone's attention settle on me. The quietest person in the room, yes, but the one holding all the cards. I clicked to the first slide. Unauthorized logins, suspicious downloads, and detailed tracking of every file she had tried to access over the past 3 months. Every attempt to tamper with our patents, every diversion of funds, every manipulation of personnel records. It was all documented. A murmur ran through the room. Victoria's face tightened as her confidence began to crack. This, I continued, is the path our data took when accessed without permission. I highlighted the decoy server logs, showing exactly where each attempt had been traced. As you can see, these actions were deliberate, systematic, and highly dangerous. Victoria's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. This isn't possible, she stammered. I didn't, I said softly, clicking to the next slide. You did, and you involved others in this attempt. The board can see the logs. We have evidence. I turned to Michael. You didn't notice any unusual activity because you trusted her, I said gently. I understand, but trust without verification can be costly. Michael's face paled. His eyes darted between me and Victoria. For the first time, he seemed to see clearly what I had been saying for years, that her ambitions were more dangerous than charming. One board member cleared his throat. Miss Park, the evidence is compelling. This is a serious breach of both security and fiduciary responsibility. Victoria tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. Please, let's hear this through. When I finished, the room was silent. Every gaze was on Victoria, not on me. For once, the stage belonged to the quiet sister who had done all the work planned all the rules, and prepared for this exact moment. Victoria's face went pale. She glanced at Michael, desperation in her eyes. You're going to let her do this? Michael swallowed hard. Elaine, she's right. This is serious. Victoria's composure shattered completely. The board collectively agreed. Her position as CFO was terminated, effective immediately. Security would escort her out. And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The quietest person in the room had taken control, not through loud speeches or glamorous events, but through preparation, observation, and unwavering resolution. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of responsibility and the sweet relief of justice intertwined. The company, our legacy, was safe. But the war wasn't over. Victoria's next move, I knew, would come not from the boardroom, but from outside, and I had to be ready.
Victoria didn't leave quietly. As the security guards escorted her out, her threats echoed down the polished marble hallways. She cursed under her breath, her voice carrying just enough for a few startled employees to hear. But I didn't flinch. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. Protecting our company, our father's legacy, and yes, even Michael, from the blind spots that love sometimes creates. The following days were a blur. Emails flooded my inbox from board members expressing support, gratitude, and relief. The senior management team, many of whom had felt sidelined during Victoria's tenure, approached me privately to offer their loyalty. It was humbling and reassuring. Yet, beneath the surface, a tension lingered. Victoria wasn't defeated. She was smart, ambitious, and resourceful. I knew she would regroup. Likely she was already consulting with lawyers, thinking about the next move that could disrupt our company or tarnish our reputation. That weekend, I spent hours in the office with Michael, reconstructing every decision made under her influence. Some were minor, easily corrected. Others could have been catastrophic if left unchecked. Slowly, we reversed the damage, reinstating the talented employees Victoria had pushed aside, reallocating funds to critical R&D, and reinforcing our security systems to prevent any further tampering. Michael sighed one night as we reviewed the updated reports. "I forgot who you really are," he admitted quietly. "Somewhere along the way, I started seeing you through Victoria's eyes instead of my own. I forgot how much you've always done." "We both forgot," I replied softly. "We forgot that family means being honest with each other, even when it's hard, even when it exposes mistakes." Meanwhile, news of Victoria's exit leaked in hushed tones across Silicon Valley. Whispers circulated, but the truth, the depth of her attempted manipulation, remained known only to those inside the company. I decided to keep it that way. The last thing I wanted was a public spectacle. This was about safeguarding what we had built, not humiliating someone who had once been family. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived at the office. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Victoria's lawyer. Inside were divorce papers for Michael, along with the demand for a significant settlement. Michael signed without hesitation. He understood, as I did, that this chapter had closed. I placed the papers aside, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. We had won the battle, but the lessons lingered. Power wasn't about appearances, lavish parties, or smooth speeches. It was about preparation, observation, and the courage to act when the moment was right. That night, I sat alone in my office, looking out over the city lights of Silicon Valley. The skyline sparkled like our dreams, ambitious, bright, and built through persistence and quiet determination. I thought about all the people who work behind the scenes, overlooked and underestimated. Success isn't measured by who shouts the loudest. It's measured by who builds, protects, and endures. And for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Not by Victoria, not even by the world,
but by myself. I had taken care of the company, our legacy, and my family, just as Dad had taught me. With Victoria out of the picture, the true work began. Removing her was only the first step. Rebuilding the company and restoring faith among employees, investors, and clients was the real challenge. I rolled up my sleeves and dived headfirst into the operational heartbeat of Chin Global Solutions. The first order of business was talent restoration. Employees Victoria had pushed aside, many of whom were brilliant engineers, creative marketers, and strategic planners, were brought back. I personally met with each department head, listening to their concerns and outlining a renewed vision: innovation, security, and sustainable growth. Their relief was palpable, their loyalty returned. For the first time in years, collaboration replaced fear. Next, we focused on technology. The ad-driven cybersecurity system I had developed quietly over the past 5 years was ready to launch. It wasn't just another product. It was a revolution, designed to protect companies from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats while generating revenue through smart advertising analytics. Investors were impressed. The system's beta testing showed unprecedented efficiency, and the media began catching wind of our innovation. Michael, who had always excelled in public relations and networking, took on the role of face of the company once again. But this time, it was different. He didn't overshadow me, he amplified our shared vision. Together, we presented at conferences, led investor calls, and appeared in industry panels. For the first time, we worked in sync. Michael handling external relations while I directed the technological and strategic core of the company. Internally, I implemented stricter protocols. Each department's budget was reviewed and optimized. R&D funds were protected, and executive responsibilities were clearly defined to prevent any future manipulation. We also enhanced our security systems, ensuring that no employee or outsider could access sensitive data without authorization. 3 months after Victoria's departure, the results were undeniable. Chin Global Solutions stock price soared. Our patents were recognized as industry-leading, and the company culture flourished. Employees were motivated, investors confident, and clients enthusiastic. The small IT firm my father had built in a converted warehouse was now a formidable player in Silicon Valley. One evening, Michael and I stayed late in the conference room, a quiet reflection replacing the hectic pace of the day. "I never realized how much you've been doing," Michael admitted. "You've carried the company on your shoulders, all while being invisible to everyone else." I smiled. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds everything together. That's a lesson we all need to remember. As I looked out at the city lights, I realized that victory wasn't about punishing Victoria or reclaiming power. It was about creating a company and a legacy that could endure challenges, betrayal, and the test of time. The company wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to the people who believed in it, to the technology that protected thousands, and to the vision we had worked so tirelessly to achieve. But I also knew that leadership was an ongoing test. The business world never slept, and competitors were always waiting. I had won the battle, but the war for innovation, excellence, and integrity would continue. And this time, I was ready for every challenge. A year had passed since the night Victoria mocked me at that extravagant party. The memory of her smirk, the echo of her words had long since faded, replaced by something far more powerful: achievement built through patience, preparation, and perseverance. Chin Global Solutions had tripled in value. Our next-generation cybersecurity system was becoming the industry standard, and the company culture was thriving. I stood on the stage at a major tech conference, the auditorium filled with innovators, investors, and journalists from around the globe. My father's photo rested on the podium, a quiet reminder of the man who had started it all. I looked out at the crowd and began to speak. Success, I said, isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about observing, preparing, and knowing your worth. Sometimes the quietest people hold the most power. Sometimes protecting what matters requires making hard choices. The audience listened intently, many nodding as if they too understood the weight of silent dedication. I shared stories of the challenges we faced, not in gossiping detail about Victoria, but in illustrating the importance of integrity, diligence, and vigilance. Every project we completed, every innovation we launched, and every team member we empowered was a testament to the power of quiet leadership. Back at the office, Michael and I had found our rhythm again. He handled public relations and investor relations with ease, while I focused on innovation and security. We had rebuilt not just the company, but trust between colleagues, between leadership, and within ourselves. Michael admitted one evening, "Dad always said you were the smart one." I didn't realize he meant in ways that mattered most: resilience, foresight, and the courage to act. And then there was Victoria. Occasionally, I'd see her name in small tech articles, consulting for startups, or offering advice at conferences. She still spoke about her time at Ching Global Solutions as a high point of her career. I smiled when I read those pieces. Leadership isn't about titles. It's about the value you create, the principles you uphold, and the people you protect. I returned to my desk, glancing once more at my father's kind eyes in the photograph. "Take care of each other," he had said. That lesson had guided me through betrayal, conflict, and the most difficult decisions I had ever made. I had taken care of our company, our legacy, and yes, even Michael. Sometimes taking care means making hard choices. Sometimes being quiet doesn't mean powerless. And sometimes the cleaning maid, dismissed, overlooked, underestimated, knows exactly what she's doing all along. As I closed my laptop and stepped away from the office, the sun set over Silicon Valley, casting a golden glow over the city. I knew the future would bring new challenges, new competitors, and new threats. But for now, I was ready. I had learned the greatest lesson of all. True power comes not from recognition, but from preparation, courage, and unwavering conviction. And with that, the quietest person in the room had finally claimed her rightful place.